Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you all for joining us this evening. I am grateful to be here with you all in person to discuss Afghan refugee resettlement and relocation progress and some of the challenges that we are seeing. This conversation doesn't start with resettlement or even with the airlift that happened last August. It starts on October 7th, 2001, when the US government began the two-decade war in Afghanistan. The war in Afghanistan came with a staggering cost. Over 2 decades, around 250,000 people died, including around 71,000 Afghan civilians, nearly 250 American servicemen. Over 20,000 American servicemen returned home with physical injuries, many of which are permanent. There is no question in my heart that the withdrawal of the US military was the right call for President Biden to make. But that doesn't mean that our commitment to the Afghan people ended when the last military plane left Kabul in August 2021. I'm here tonight with you all for 2 reasons. First, Minnesota should be proud of the contribution we have made to this historic effort to welcome and resettle tens of thousands of Afghan refugees in the US. Governor Walz and our panelists, Minnesota Resettlement Coordinator Rochelle King, mobilized Minnesotans, government, private, nonprofit sectors to ramp up resettlement to historic levels, including taking on the work within our own state government. Nasreen Sajadi and the Afghan Cultural Society of Minnesota stepped up to welcome our new neighbors and help them transition to their new life in Minnesota. General Dan Gabrielle from the Minnesota National Guard led a unit of Minnesotans down to New Mexico to run Operation Allies Welcome last fall. Their work ensured our new neighbors had a comfortable and safe place to eat, sleep, pray, and live until they were able to be resettled permanently. Second, the United States is still working to relocate people out of Afghanistan. Family members of people who are relocated here over the last 8 months, people who worked with the United States military or with American organizations and many others. This work deserves the same amount of attention and investment as the war itself. It is one of the greatest tests of values that our nation claims to hold. As a person who fled war at a young age, I can tell you that war is never the answer. The situation that so many Afghans are experiencing now should remind us of that. War will always result in death and displacement. I can also tell you from first-hand experience how critical the difference is between making it out of war zone or not making it out of war zone. The commitments we made to Afghan people, especially those who supported American organizations and our government, could not be broken. I want to take a minute to recognize some special members of our audience. I'm thrilled that we have staff and clients from Minnesota's resettlement agencies here tonight. I won't embarrass you all by making you stand up, but I want to give you all a shout out. To the resettlement staff, thank you for your tireless effort, for all you have done to help our new neighbors start their new lives in Minnesota. These groups are Minnesota Council of Churches, Lutheran Social Services, Arrive Ministries, and the International Institute of Minnesota. These are also organizations that are responsible for me being here as well. To our new Afghan neighbors, let me be one of the many voices welcoming you. I am so glad that you are here, and I look forward to representing you in Washington. Please give them a round of applause. With that, I would like to introduce our panelists. Rochelle King is the refugee coordinator for the state of Minnesota. In this role, she works closely with resettlement agencies, nonprofits, the private sector to make sure refugees are not only welcomed in Minnesota, but they have the support they need to excel in their new life. Before she entered this role, in 2015, Rachel worked as the director of refugee services for the Minnesota Council of Churches for over a decade. Nasreen Sajadi is the Advocate Director for the Afghan Cultural Society of Minnesota. Since 2018, the Society has focused on improving mental health and social health, promoting economic self-sufficiency, and creating a space for cultural well-being. Brigadier General Gabrielle is the Minnesota National Guard's Chief Advisor on Operations, Training, and Readiness. He's responsible for command, supervision, oversight, and leadership of the 133rd Airlift Wing and the 148th Fighter Wing. He was deployed with the U.S. military multiple times, including to Afghanistan, and is with us tonight to discuss Operation Allies. Welcome. And lastly, Sean Van Diver is the founder and director of Afghan Event Coalition. This coalition represents over 180 organizations, including refugee groups, relocation task forces, and more. Afghan EVAC works closely with the White House, the State Department, and Congress to advocate for relocation, resettlement, and inclusion into our communities. We will start our panelists with each speaker taking a few minutes to talk about their work. Then I will pose some questions to the panelists before we open it up to the audience. And we will start with the General.
Thank you, Congressman Omar. My name is Dan Gabrielle. I was fortunate and honored to have commanded the Afghan Resettlement Task Force at Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico from late August of 2021 to end of January 2022. And I'm honored to be on this panel and that I was asked to participate. Holloman was one of 8 safe havens in Operation Allies Welcome. They were located on military bases throughout the country, and we were one of only 2 which were Air Force led. I and my airmen and soldiers were in direct support of the lead federal agency, the Department of Homeland Security, along with the Department of State and multiple other governmental and non-governmental interagency partners who shepherded the Afghan guests through the resettlement process and into their new American homes. This was a direct support of civil authorities' mission for the military. We were not in charge, we were in support of the lead federal agency. We were the only fully deployed in task force. In other words, we all came from other bases into Holloman Air Force Base. And we consisted of 1,700 active duty Guard and Reserve airmen and soldiers from over 50 different bases, over 2 rotations over 5 months. To give you an idea of the speed of the genesis of this whole operation and this mission, our airmen came to this mission with only a couple days' notice. I was told I was commanding it on the 23rd, I was there on the 24th, and we received our first Afghans on the 31st of August. It's an incredible testament to the airmen and what they can do when they're asked to do something outside of their comfort zone. And in only 3 days, our airmen built a 1,200 capacity airman tent city in the middle of the main base. And then our Air Force contractor, Floor Corporation, our airmen built out and partitioned our 5,000 capacity, 52-acre Afghan village of Amano, which means peace and hope. It was receiving Afghans within 5 days of the construction of that massive village, and it only took 10 days to build. And it was a work in progress for weeks. So active construction going on with Afghans moving in, coming in on airlift, which began on the 31st. And then it was halted on September 10th due to a measles outbreak at some of the lily pads, they call them, or the overseas bases in Qatar and Italy and Germany, where they're held until an inoculation period was met. And then we received them again on the 11th of October to the 27th of October when our last flight came in. At our peak of operations, we had over 900 airmen living in a tent city on the main base, supporting over 4,500 Afghans living in the large 52-acre tent village 5 miles north of the main base in the middle of the desert. Over the 5 months from August to January, our DoD role was housing, meals, medical care, morale, and facilitation of education and acculturation, and entertainment, with the goal of helping our honored Afghan guests to not just survive, but thrive during their stay in our care while awaiting resettlement. We built multiple basketball, soccer, volleyball courts, as well as a big cricket pitch. I never knew cricket was their passion. We conducted men's, women's, and integrated shuras to ensure inclusivity in all of our decision making. We had men's and women's morale, welfare, and recreation facilities, and prayer tents and mosques. And we played the azan 5 times a day throughout the village. They gave them a comfort of home. We tried to create a space for them to feel as comfortable in this transition period as they could. I had a cultural advisor who was one of 5 Muslim chaplains in the Air Force, and she's the only female imam. She was invaluable to me as my cultural advisor, and more than anybody among our airmen, she built the deep trust with the Afghan community, and also helped the airmen to understand and build the trust with the Afghan Muslim community. We brought in Air Force bands, we had an American Idol performer, we held many festivals and sporting events, such as a weekly Airman Afghan soccer match, had a large 9-team cricket tournament, and instructional games in which our airmen learned the game from the Afghans while playing. We held a wildly popular Amano talent show, which drew half the village in attendance. These people are so creative and artistic. Multiple murals were created all through the village, and we facilitated any creative outlet we could for them. Our task force enabled the resettlement of over 7,200 Afghans in 5 months. This was our part of the total DoD-enabled resettlement of over 65,000 Afghans in Operation Allies Welcome. I'm so proud of our multi-capable airmen who came to this hyper-revolutionary mission with only a couple days' notice and operated in most cases outside of their military specialties in this unprecedented humanitarian mission after the largest humanitarian airlift in U.S. history. I call it hyper-revolutionary because we were learning and adjusting so rapidly in this mission, which was often referred to as building the airplane in flight. And our DoD and interagency folks excelled so well and collaboratively in this mission, where there was no ego among our leadership team, because none of us has ever done this before, and we all truly needed each other to rapidly evolve and adjust. The airmen and soldiers embraced the culture that we promoted of building deep trust with our Afghan guests, as they were the first faces of America these people would ever experience. We were so honored to have served this amazing population of Afghans who risked so much for our security and are the most resilient, patient, and enduring people I have ever met. And half of these people were children who truly stole our airmen and soldiers' hearts. These kids were so resilient, independent, outgoing, and positive. I always attribute it to they didn't come from the helicopter parents that we have in the U.S. And they're going to march into their schools and communities with great confidence and contribute so much to our already rich and diverse culture. For me personally, and so many of our airmen and soldiers, this was such a fulfilling mission because it was the culmination of many of our past contingency deployments to Afghanistan and Southwest Asia. To have the privilege of helping those who helped us so much over the years, it was simply the best deployment, command, and mission of my career. And I'm honored to be here tonight. Thank you.
All right, hello everyone. My name is Rochelle King and I serve as a state refugee coordinator here in the state of Minnesota. I'm also very pleased and honored to be a part of this opportunity to share some look back. It's only been 8 months, right, but some look back of where we're at in the state of Minnesota and where we're going. Listening to you talk, General, I remember watching the humanitarian crisis unfold as we watched it as Minnesotans and as residents of this state on the TV. And I'm also really proud to say that as we watched that, Minnesotans came together. Really proud of our state. We didn't know exactly at the time, back in August, what it would mean for Minnesota or how we would individually be involved. But what I experienced is that Minnesotans came out and wanted to be a part of whatever was going to come next to provide hope and safety for the Afghans who had so closely worked with our military. So back in August, again, so my role as state refugee coordinator, as many of you know, most of the Afghans who arrived to the United States didn't come through a traditional resettlement process. And so as we were watching this humanitarian crisis unfold, it was very unclear what the role of our office, what the role of state would be. We watched this federal response happen, not knowing really what was going to come afterwards. So in the state of Minnesota, what we did is we decided to bring people together. Let's create a place where we can talk about things as they're unfolding, where we can come together, where we can share and invite people who want to be a part of this response, not knowing exactly what it was going to look like, to be able to come together and share that expertise. So since August, we've been meeting weekly with all different sorts of government agencies, nonprofit organizations, faith communities, individuals to be a part of this. We like to just take things that sound good, so we coined it Operation Allies Welcome Minnesota, just like adding Minnesota onto the end of it. And began meeting in August, and I think just a couple of weeks ago we marked our 20th meeting of that group, of the community roundtable coming together to talk about that. So when we started the goal of coming together, this Operation Allies Welcome Minnesota, was to think about how we could maximize the capacity of the state of Minnesota to be able to welcome people and to ensure that any person that came here was going to be connected with the basic needs, the resources that they needed to be able to build a stable foundation and achieve their potential and contribute to Minnesota in the long term. And so how we did that, the federal government was really working with national resettlement agencies and local resettlement agencies that the Congresswoman had mentioned earlier today, to be those hands and feet for people when they came here, to be those people who meet people when they get off of the plane and connect them. We knew though in Minnesota that after several years of very low numbers of people being arrived to our state, with humanitarian protection status, that there was some rebuilding that needed to happen within those infrastructures. And so our goal as a state was really to see how we could come together to maximize the capacity, to build the resources and the capacity of those agencies to be able to welcome more people. And just to give you a sense of how that worked out in the state of Minnesota, back in August when the federal government reached out to local resettlement agencies to say, what is your capacity to be able to welcome Afghans to Minnesota? The number that went back to the federal government was 240 people. A couple of months later, again, we had been meeting together and we said, what do we need? What are the things that we could do together that individual agencies can't do so well on their own? Like, what are the ways we could create some efficiencies to invest strategically and bring people together? So some of the things we decided to do was look at if we could have, we knew that housing was going to be a major obstacle, initial housing. Lots of people coming at the same time in a tight housing market was going to be very challenging. So we made the commitment from the state to raise private dollars to support a centralized transitional housing option. So we were able eventually to stand up a hotel and then 2 hotels that would be able to provide those basic needs when people first arrived. So we were able to do that and work in partnership with those local resettlement agencies to make sure that it worked for how they did their job. And so pretty soon, when the federal government asked how many people can Minnesota welcome, the response back was 500 people. We went on a couple more months and we started building out and working with community organizations, nonprofit organizations who were the people who were like delivering donations to the hotels, right? Advising on what are the right kinds of activities, what do we need to be thinking about in the hotel? And you are going to hear from one person who's a big advisor in that soon here. So then the next time the federal government came back and asked what is the capacity of Minnesota, it was 750 people. And again, while we were continuing to meet with people, continuing to bring folks together, we still felt in the state of Minnesota that the capacity of the infrastructure exceeded what the individual agencies were able to do. So we were able to have the opportunity to work to actually directly do something that has never happened in the state of Minnesota before, never has happened in maybe only in a couple of states ever, is that we, as the state of Minnesota, said, based on the response within our state, the individuals, the volunteers, the philanthropic community, the community organizations that have come together, we think that beyond those 750 people, we could welcome another 750 people. And this was really important because at that point in time, the federal government had been unable to really secure enough capacity for the people who were on those safe havens within the United States, on those 8 military bases. And so we were afforded the opportunity to be able to welcome some of those people, give them a place to be. So at the end of it all, our capacity, when the federal government came back, the capacity was 1,500 people as of January. So to date, we have in Minnesota welcomed about 1,250 people to the state of Minnesota, Afghans, through the Afghan Placement and Assistance Program, and about just under 500 people through the state-sponsored program. So we're really proud of that. And that is just a phase 1. So where we're at right now in Minnesota, we're really talking about having turned a corner. The emergency response phase of this response is over, and we're really turned the corner now to think about the long-term integration. People are here. There's a little bit of an exhale, but now the really, really, really hard work begins about that permanent stability, that long-term integration, and that economic stability and self-sufficiency that comes next. One of the things that is the hardest thing to do when I talk to people, the hardest thing to do and the most important thing to do is to maintain people's hope through really challenging time. Sometimes it feels like people should feel okay when they're here and they're safe, right? But this is another traumatic experience, and I just want to really praise everybody who's here who has gone through that experience to know that it is okay still to feel unsettled when you're here, and that there is hope moving forward. We want to make sure that people can know that while it is really hard, this first year is going to be really, really hard, there is something better beyond that, and it will be coming. So right now we're really focusing on long-term integration, and we'll love to talk more about that as we move forward.
Hi everybody. Ramazan Laura to all of you who are practicing. I am Nasreen Sajadi. I am the Advocacy Director at Afghan Cultural Society. I joined the organization in 2019. It started, the founder is here, John started this organization in 2018 because she was concerned that her children were losing touch with the culture. And so she wanted to find a way to bring it into their lives in a beautiful way. And so I was very excited when I met her because I was on that journey as well. And so we have been actively trying to bring the Afghan community together. Amina had helped with the census a few years, I don't know when that was.
Yeah, 2020.
2020? Okay, Amina helped with the census, and when this response happened, Anjali knew her and reached out to her and said, hey, we really would like community involved in this response. And so she called me up and she said, hey, I'm not doing this without you. And so we both started showing up. And at first it started out as us we didn't know how to prepare. Everybody was at Fort McCoy. We didn't know when people were coming. We were dealing with our own emotions. Her mom was back there. Like, there was so much going on. We didn't know what to do, and we just kept showing up. It started with making lists, to being called upon for this meeting, being called upon for that meeting, and we just kept coming. And I'm a school teacher. Amina is an IT person, and we started this organization now where we're a resettlement agency with the help of Rochelle. And it's been volunteer based up until this point. We've been everywhere, ultimately, trying to make sure that our community is getting what they need, and it's hard because it's the two of us. We have two of our board members here as well, but it's been, at first it started out with just a lot of different community members here, but we're all getting spread so thin because every organization wants cultural relevance, I guess, involved in the work that they're doing. And so we're kind of everywhere. I feel like every organization has an Afghan present now. But this work, like Rochelle said, the emergency response is over on your guys' end, but for us, just in the green room, we're talking about how folks are going to be houseless. And for me, that hit my heart. I had to keep myself from crying because this is my community. But, sorry, I can't talk about this without getting emotional. But so our organization currently is trying to find ways to support after everybody else is gone. And it's going to be a lot of work. So we are worried, we're very concerned about mental health, we're concerned about education for our youth, we're concerned about people being isolated because it's not the typical response. People are scattered. We don't have Cedar Riverside for our community to go be at. They're all over the place, and people are feeling isolated and scared, and we're doing everything we can to find ways to get them the supports they need and to bring the community together.
Hello, folks. Thank you so much for inviting me out here to Minnesota. I'm a San Diegan, so this is like not this weather's not really my jam. My name is Sean Van Diver. I'm a Navy veteran, and I'm the founder of Afghan Event. The number one question I get, besides do I say the hashtag, because that's what our logo looks like. You don't, by the way, you don't say the hashtag. Yeah, that's right. Is what is Afghan Event? But I like to talk about who is Afghan Event. We're not a government agency. We're not a long-standing nonprofit. We're not a well-funded multinational organization. We're volunteers. People who, for the most part, have never met each other. Veterans, frontline civilians, public servants, Afghans, Americans, other refugees. People who live here in America and all around the world. People who span religious, political, and geographic boundaries. We are a cross-section of America. The president ran on restoring the soul of America, and I've never seen the soul of America in D.C. Have you ever seen the soul of America in D.C.? No, I think that's what it is, but I'll tell you, yeah. I see it every day in the folks that I have the pleasure of and the honor of working with every day. We're united by one thing, the shared commitment to help Afghan allies who have stood with Americans for 20 years through the longest and most gendered conflict in U.S. history. We were established in San Diego in 2021 as Kabul was falling. Since then, Afghan Event has, the members of our Afghan Event coalition, has safely evacuated thousands of Afghans. And we started with just one. My buddy Lucky was in Afghanistan when things went south. I thought he'd been killed. He texted me from the top of a mountain in Rangoon, about 7-8 hours outside of Kabul. And he said, "Brother, I'm stuck on this mountain in Rangoon. The Taliban have us surrounded. We're running out of ammunition. I think I'm going to die. Will you help get my wife and our children back to San Diego?" I thought he'd been killed. I hadn't heard from him in a couple of days. When he reemerged after a few days, we continued trying to help him get home. He had stolen a jingle truck and talked his way through 10 Taliban checkpoints over 2 days, and somehow that was the easiest part of his journey. It was an incredibly difficult and demoralizing process. And after Lucky got home, before Lucky had even gotten home, we kind of looked around and saw there were all these groups popping up, and there was nobody working to deconflict and ensure they collaborated. We wanted this to result in awards and adulation and lives saved, not house and confinement and lives lost. So we started doing that. We started collaborating. Every morning, every night, we started doing calls. First with 7 groups. It grew by the end of August to 50 groups. Now we're at 108. That's when Afghan Event was born, when we realized that if we didn't all work together, then this would, then a lot of these efforts would either cause people to get hurt or they would fail. Simply put, we help our Afghan allies battle bureaucracy so they can make it out safe. And I would challenge you, anybody who says they would take credit for saving any lives, if they're not Afghan and they weren't in Kabul, they're full of something I don't think I'm supposed to say in high school. The credit should first go to Afghans, all the new arrivals who are here in the audience and who many of you have been helping. Thank you. And then no one organization can take any credit. All the things that we worked together to accomplish took a fabric of organizations. It took a lot of different organizations to get safe transportation, to get people on the airport, to make sure they had passports, to make sure they had food, to get here, and now to get safely and durably resettled. Today, we represent more than 180 organizations, and we work closely with the Department of State, Defense, Homeland Security, and Veterans Affairs, as well as the related White House teams in the West Wing, the National Security Council, and in the Office of the First Lady. We built a secure case management system, a self-service tool called Train Tools and Resources for Afghans in Need, and myriad infographics translated into Dari and Pashto to better communicate the issues that were most impacting those who sought help. In addition to relocations and communications work, we've distributed more than $1 million in direct aid to Afghans arriving in the U.S. through $5,000 microgrants. We're out of money now. And if there's one thing I could leave you with today, it's this. We need to pass an Afghan Adjustment Act. There are so many people who have arrived here. There are so many folks who have arrived here, and their future is uncertain. There's a bipartisan, bicameral proposal that is being introduced soon in Congress. And that Afghan Adjustment Act would allow certain Afghan evacuees to apply for lawful permanent resident status, also known as a green card. The law would mirror efforts made by the U.S. government for Vietnamese and South Asian refugees following the fall of Saigon. And look, Afghans deserve, and we owe, a chance at becoming permanent U.S. residents without unnecessary delay, without unnecessary paperwork, without incurring enormous legal bills. It's the right thing to do, and I urge you to join Afghan Event in supporting this bill. And look, we appreciate any support you can provide, from spreading the word to donations. If you're a group that's working in this space, join our coalition at afghanevent.org/join. And visit us today. Thank you.
Again, thank you all for the work that you all do that I think put together really, right, exemplifies what it means to show up and to do the job that is at hand. And I commend you all for your determination, your sacrifice, and everything that you have done for those who desperately needed help. And I think every time we accomplish something, it is important for us to look back to see what we could have done better, so that it could be used as a lesson for the future, and just also in ways of moving forward. So I wanted to ask this first question to Sean, what do you think we did well in the airlift period in August, and what should we have done differently?
What did we do well? I think there's going to be a lot of books and a lot of history written about what we did poorly. What we did well is that we showed up as America, and I think from General Gabrielle's story earlier about 2 days' notice to getting this right, to the various groups that stood up, to Nazreen's story of standing up the nonprofit and the work that you did on the relocation. The federal government was caught on their heels, and look, the credit for that for preparedness is shared across 4 presidential administrations. It's shared across myriad departments, and it's shared across the culture in our government, which is slow and plodding and bureaucratic, and an idea that we should wait and see what happens rather than be proactive and make the change we know needs to happen. The reality is that resettlement agencies, the State Department, all of the government entities and the semi-government entities were not, were decimated in the last administration. All of those jobs were taken apart, the capacity wasn't there, and it is being rebuilt now. And I think that we've seen in really record time these groups stand up. So I don't have a lot of good things to say about August, beyond, and I don't like the Monday morning quarterback, right? There's a lot of things that could have happened differently. However, I will say that it was remarkable to see and to be so front and center in a lot of how Americans stood up together across political ideologies, religions, geographies, everything, to recognize, because of the way that Afghans have made us, because of the special relationship that Afghans have with American service members, diplomats, aid workers, anybody that has Afghans in their community has a really special relationship, I think. And the fruits of those relationships showed up in August and have continued in these thousands of people who are doing this work without pay, to much detriment to their mental health and their physical well-being. And like, people cleared out 401ks. And so when I think about what went well, I don't think anything. The government did, although the Air Force did fly planes really well. I'm like, yeah, you gotta reach, right? So I do think the Air Force had an extraordinary airlift, and the State Department on the ground really worked their butts off to bring order to the chaos that probably shouldn't have been there. But I do think we're going to learn a lot from this. And so I know that with the ongoing efforts, a lot of lessons have been learned.
Yeah, I think in many ways, right, it was one of the largest airlifts that historic airlifts. And I've been in many ways impressed by it. And I think it's also really impressive just how fast we were able to get operations running to try to do the processes. And I went to Fort McCoy to visit with some of the refugees that were there. And as someone who's been in a refugee processing refugee camp, the orderly in the way things were running, and I'm sure General, yours was probably even more orderly. Ali, who's the deputy director in my district office, and myself were both refugees who know what being evacuated looks like, who know what it means to be in a camp looks like, who know what it means to be resettled looks like. It felt different than what we've experienced. And so I wanted, General, if you could say a little bit more about just the enormity of the Operation Allies Welcome, what was unique about this particular effort, and if there are any lessons to be drawn from this particular experience that could be used and utilized in other efforts.
Thank you, ma'am.
Too early to do these analysis, but.
Well, in reality, we did a very, very thorough after action, which was required out of this, and we all sort of half joked that, you know, when is this ever going to happen again? Was there going to be another 20-year conflict where we're going to have refugees coming, and it won't be to this magnitude, but now you have Ukraine. So, I mean, it's amazing, but there is a lot of, and I said that term before, and I'll say it was used so often about building the airplane in flight. This was such a new mission that we've never done before, and it really was hyper-evolving. And I think if there were things that I can think of that I saw that shift from day one through the 5 months was very quickly, and I collaborated with all the other 7 commanders of the task forces, and we'd have our VTC time where it was just us airing our, did you ever run into this? Did you run into this? What do you do here? We can just be embarrassed among ourselves because we were trying to make it work for all of us collaboratively, and we were all in it for the success of everyone. But the paradigm shift off the bat went from almost like when you have a hurricane or a natural disaster where you just need to keep people going and living and housed and fed for a 2-3 week period. I think that nobody from the top down understood the longevity of this, and it was very evident that we went from a survive to thrive paradigm very quickly, that this was going to become enduring. And it's a shift change, because when you're working military contracts for the Air Force to the contractor, they're adjusting constantly. And the flexibility, I think, that the contractor, as well as the Air Force contracting officers had, was very impressive to me, because, I mean, and the Afghan guests, they spoke out. I mean, and that was what we encouraged. And we had shores right away where we'd sit, and they would have honest exchanges, just really great conversations, very passionate conversations. But I think the trust we built by day one, saying let's organize shores as the airlift came in and bring off this last airplane, a member from each family to show up, that made a big difference with that crosstalk. They even spoke loudly one day when we really were the enablers, because, as you know, labor in southern New Mexico is not very plentiful. So our contractors were unable to get folks to serve the meals, so our airmen were serving the meals. I learned very quickly from my first trip to Fort Bliss's task force before I ever went to Holland, and their commander showed me their task force. Our contractor built 30 by 90 meter, what I call circus tents, but they were not contracted to be partitioned for families and males and female tents, and we learned quick we needed that just for human dignity. Well, since it wasn't in the contract, guess what? Our airmen did 35,000 man hours, 24/7 ops for 3 weeks, and bought up all the plywood and vinyl and everything in the 3-state area, and worked overnight, all night, while Afghans were moving in, partitioning 500-person tents in a 5,000-person village. So our airmen were huge enablers in that respect. And I think, even though maybe long-term the DoD was not meant or built for this type of mission, I don't think that there's anybody but the DoD that could have done this in this amount of time with 2 days' notice and enable. So as we were serving the meals, finally the contractor upped his hourly salary and got workers there. But the first day he had his own workers and our airmen were out of the business, the portions went down. And you can see these were new workers who wanted to make an impression, keep a job. They were minimum paid workers, and they were not serving the amounts they were the day before. And the Afghan men stopped their line and refused to go forward until we made the portions bigger. And I knew right away early in the program I needed to be at that dining hall every night, because if there was ever a place where sort of a flashpoint was, it was there. And luckily, right away we figured it out. I wasn't in charge of the workers because they're contractors, but I said, you got to give these guys double portions, because they are in sustainment mode here, where they're under multiple layers of stress. They are grieving the loss of their country. They all had families back there. They were living in one of the most diverse group of Afghans they've ever lived in. And they're worried how they're going to get along. And that'll burn calories. That's metabolism, and that's what they needed. And they made it clear, and within like 10 minutes, we stepped in and talked to the contractor, and the meals, were served proper portions. But that was the kind of the things that we evolved quickly and we learned, and it was almost like, if you had a good sense of humor about things as well, leadership team, like that didn't work, let's try this now. And I think all the task force commanders were doing the same thing, but I will point out, I alluded to the fact that it's a diverse community, and I think, Azreen, maybe you can attest to this too. I mean, a lot of the folks from Kabul who, maybe had multiple master's degrees, worked for the UN or the embassy, they were very westernized, and they looked at us and identified sort of with a lot of the Americans. And then you have very rural, culturally and religious conservative folks that these folks from Kabul probably had never lived amongst. So within that task force, it was a very diverse group that they were living amongst, and the whole dynamics of that situation. So the biggest thing was just, I think, getting back to your question, Rep. Omar, is about, it would be getting the mindset from the top down nationally that this was going to be an enduring situation and planning that way. But we had the flexibility of adjusting contracts, but making sure that we knew that this was going to be something we wanted everybody to thrive, and that was a culture that I really pushed. And then the other part of it as well, knowing that there were some 240 resettlement agencies, I don't know what you could ever do to robust those in such a short period of time to be able to accept these folks. But in 5 months, 6 months is a long time to ask these very enduring, patient people to live in these conditions. But if there was a way to make sure that those agencies are ready for anything that would happen in the future, if those agencies had been gutted and they were ready to go in where they should have been, this would have been so much easier. So that's sort of my 2 cents. But I think the flexibility that we had allowed us to be able to overcome a lot of these things. So that's all I have.
Thank you, General. Nasreen, you made a point earlier about the anxiety that the community rightfully has, right? About what happens when everybody isn't as attentive and tuned in to the needs of what our new neighbors need. So I'm wondering if you can say a little bit about what would support from the general public in the efforts that you all are engaged in looks like, and how we can sustain those contributions for the community.
We've actually been very lucky because we do have a huge Somali community here. We have a huge Hmong community here, and they've really stepped up and have kind of given us the warnings on what to look for. Don't let them resettle in there. Watch out for this thing. Do this. Like, it's been kind of beautiful. Honestly, this community roundtable that they've created has built this massive network that has been able to catch where the resettlement agencies have missed, because they were gutted. They have new caseworkers that are just learning this. They don't have the funds. They're overworked. They have 40 cases, 40 families per person. Like, that is a lot. So that's been really helpful. I think showing up in that way, showing up to these roundtables, showing up and connecting with us is the best way to do this work. And we've had such a that's been the most beautiful part of this whole process, is the number of people from what you mentioned earlier, from different backgrounds, different religions, different races. Everybody is showing up, different political stances. Everybody is showing up in a way that I've never seen before. And other refugee communities are saying the same. Like, we didn't get this. We've never seen this. This is not something we've ever experienced, and that's been very beautiful. I think the thing that we need is to keep continuing. We need the support. Afghan Cultural Society needs the support locally, but we've been hearing a lot of stories of other communities in other states who are not receiving the same type of love that we are giving our folks here, which is scary and sad, because we are missing the point a lot of the times here. We're getting calls about people who have their EBT card stop working, or this is happening, or they're getting taken advantage at a job or something else, and that's terrifying because people don't know how to advocate for themselves, and that's a big part. We need people that know the systems, that are willing to advocate and speak up. We need more of that.
I would say as Somali refugees, we've been here long and still need that help too. So, it's a long process, and I'm glad to hear that my Somali brothers and sisters and others are stepping up and helping from what they've learned themselves. Rochelle, can you say a little bit about some of the primary obstacles and challenges that resettlement agencies face here in Minnesota and elsewhere, and what we can do in Congress to help? I know probably Sean also has something to add to that too.
Sure.
And we'll open up, I promise, we'll open up for the audience questions.
So interestingly, the state of Minnesota, so how like resettlement works overall is that they kind of separate the initial resettlement with resettlement agencies and private national organizations from long-term integration and work with states, right? So in a normal situation, outside of this one, is that the states and my role really gets involved with sort of the longer-term integration. One of the things that was very unique about this particular situation is that it was sort of all hands on deck from the very beginning, and really recognizing how the last several years has really been hard on the infrastructure that develops slowly and painstakingly through relationships, through across communities, across infrastructures to ensure that resettlement goes well. To the points earlier, I think, Minnesota has a very rich tradition in resettlement, and to your point, Nasreen, I was also just like so thrilled that immigrant communities who have come before, who have gone through that process, were here and ready to step up and to share their learnings, to kind of like give this newer community a little bit of a step forward. That said, I think that this has been a really amazing opportunity because it has, it actually has there's been more resources for this resettlement than there has been for other resettlement, right? Which has been good because we can build out that infrastructure so that hopefully we're not in a place where we were several years ago where we had to rebuild that. And it allows to build out those things that are beyond just the normal, like, basic needs things, right? The things like ensuring that community has a place to step in, ensuring that there's a volunteer infrastructure in place to do that, ensuring that it is more than just like a checklist of items that needs to happen, but individual sort of like thinking and planning with families. And that doesn't happen by an agency, that doesn't happen by a case manager, that is a community. Like, it takes a community to welcome and resettle a person, to resettle a family. And this experience has brought together people in different ways that I'm really hoping endures, not just for the Afghan community, but for the communities who come later. And so I think that if the question is like, how can we keep this going, is like, keep showing up. Keep showing up, and one of the things that our office is really trying to do is help to keep creating opportunities where there's a place for people who want to plug in. Because sometimes it can be really hard as a community member to know what is the right place to plug in. If I want to contribute, if I want to get involved, what's the right place to do that? So we're really grateful that the federal government allocated a lot of resources. Hopefully they can continue to do that to sustain the infrastructure that is continuing to be developed, because I think what we have found is that it is really needed, right? Everybody deserves to know that their housing is going to be stable for a while, right? And even in this situation where there's more resources to do that than there are in the past, it still feels tenuous. And so it takes time to be able to like build that stability, to be able to maintain that hope moving forward. So I guess I'm not sure if I'm answering the question anymore. I'm talking in circles, but it takes a community, so making sure that there's places for people to plug in and that there's resources that support the ways that people can plug in. And that is both a public need. There's resources that are needed to do that, and hopefully the federal government can continue to invest. But there's also private resources locally, and individual people, hearts and hands and feet, are actually the most important part of resettlement.
Wonderful. At this moment, we would like to open up to the audience if there are people with questions. Are there mics around? And yeah, please, I don't know why we keep turning the lights down, but. Accommodator, these hands went up first, if you want to take them first. And then over there where you were just at. So.
Good evening, everybody. I think the praise that you guys have earned is well worth mentioning. But I think at this point, I see things very differently. I have a family, an Afghan family, 7 people. And we're living in a hotel. They don't have a place to stay. The long-term integration is a problem that I am constantly meeting dead ends. I don't know who to call. When I call the Lutheran Brotherhood or the American Community Churches and all this, there's nobody there. My job is going to be over when he has a job and his family speaks the language and he's got a house and maybe he has a car so he can go to work. Right now, I can't get any kind of information, even from the caseworkers. And so rather than go through a litany of all my issues, I'm not looking for that today. Who do I call? How do I get help? Because that is the mission. Now, I was in the Marine Corps Reserve for 23 years. Once you make the landing, your job is not over with. It doesn't surprise me because I know how soldiers, Marines, sailors, airmen do. They'll do it 24 hours a day forever. They'll do it forever. Okay, but there comes a point, that's not what they need. So they've been given safety, they've been given food, they've been given room and board. They need other resources to get them language skills. When I see my family, they have kids from 6 till 20. None of them speak English. They're sitting in hotels. There's no instruction there. And so my daughter, who's a pilot, was a pilot in the Army, three tours over there, she gave her a computer. Now they have a computer. We're limited to what we can do. And I think I saw your hand up, Ms. King. I got your names, but I would really like to know who can I call, because ultimately it's about individuals needing a hand. And phase 1, you've done really well. The hard phase is right now getting them their language skills, their job skills, getting them to get into schools, houses. That's a hard thing, and I can't do it. I need without somebody's help. So, can I get a card from whoever can give me a card?
A quality will give you his card, who's standing next to you.
Okay, that's good enough for me.
Okay,
And John, I definitely want to get a card from you.
A quality works in my office, and he will see to it that you do have the right places that will make sure the family gets everything that they need.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Michelle Garnett Mackenzie. I'm at the Advocacy for Human Rights, and I really appreciate what you're saying, sir, because this is a long-term journey, not an arrival situation. We've also talked about it as a resettlement issue, which it's not. Nobody has refugee status, so I think you maybe alluded to the need for Congress to act right away so that we can get past this. But we have built a really beautiful airplane in a way that I think we've never seen, and that is stepping forward in a humanitarian situation, crisis situation, with with welcome rather than with warehousing outside our borders, which is where the world's 84 million displaced people are, for the most part. They're not being welcomed. How do you see this transforming our asylum system? Because that's what our clients, the people who are seeking asylum in the United States, they face not even the level that you described of having a hotel, right? Or having an EBT card, because they're not included in that. How can we, kind of bring this energy of thinking about it as a resettlement situation, but understanding it's an immigration problem, and how we can bring that together and solve this collectively, beyond just the Afghan Adjustment Act, which has to be introduced. Please introduce it. We are waiting desperately, and have been drafting busily for months. So I'll leave it there and turn it back to you.
Accommodate, come over here for the next question, because he had his hand up before. I think that's a really important question, and one that we've been thinking about a lot in Congress, right? I think a lot of people forget that many of the Afghans who have been evacuated, although we are saying relocation, resettlement, all the terminology that we are using generally doesn't apply because they are getting waivers. And we have to try to make sure that there is some permanency to their status in order for them to get some of the resources that should be allocated to people who will normally have all of the resources for resettlement. I think, the gentleman that spoke, that might be some of the challenges that his family is having, and it's going to take a lot of effort before we course correct to try to address some of the challenges that the folks who are already here without the proper status for support to be able to get the support that they need. But that is something that we're thinking about, and it's going to take some pieces of legislation to correct that. Our immigration system obviously is broken, and it needs a lot of work. And so I'm hoping some of the crises that we are seeing, not just with the Afghan situation, but with Ukraine, a lot of that allows us to re-examine some of the systems that we have in place that haven't really worked in the way that they should. So thank you.
Sean, welcome to our summer. If you come in a couple of months, ski season starts again. Before I ask my question, I want to state, Representative Omar, my name is Mustafa Omar. We were cousins back in the days in previous life. I want to publicly thank you. I'm not your constituent, neither am I affiliated to any political party, but your office has been incredibly helpful. And if I were your constituent, you would have had my vote. Now to my question is, Sean, I'm going to borrow a term you used, poor preparedness. I think that summarizes very well what happened. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Shelter for Life, an organization that works with federal government agencies around the world. Afghanistan is one of the countries where we've worked. When the saga happened, veterans, yes, private individuals, people who had served in Afghanistan, worked tirelessly to help evacuate some of our staff out of Afghanistan to UAE. But now, they're stuck in bureaucracy. So my question here, Sean, for you and Congressman for you is, what next? I'm grateful for what the panelists mentioned here, what the services they've provided here. There are a number of people there who are waiting for one paperwork after another. And do I have this application? Do I not? What is next? If you could shed light on.
Sure. Thank you so much, Mustafa. I really appreciate you coming out here tonight, and I tend to agree with you. I think Rep. Omar's staff is absolutely incredible. So a few things. One, earlier I talked a lot about the preparedness of the federal government. I want to be very clear. The moral injury and the trauma that everybody who's been a part of this has faced, Afghans in particular, here abroad, is in a smaller sense the term shared across the groups that have been working on this, the active duty military that have been working on this, certainly on the case managers and the resettlement agencies, and certainly in the congressional caseworkers, and also in the federal government employees who have been breaking themselves to, with very little resources and a decimated system, pull this off. So I talked about a lot of doom and gloom earlier, but I do think, I really want to highlight the incredible work of the federal government employees, State Department, DHS, DOD, and more. Just really remarkable stuff. And I'm very hopeful that our country will get our stuff together around mental health, leaning into the need in our communities for federally funded and all support for refugees, Afghans and Somali and others, as well as anybody who's involved in this sort of thing. Towards your question about UAE and the Emiratis humanitarian city, the Tasman worker city, for those that aren't aware, there were a few different pathways out of Afghanistan. Pre-August 31st, you could get a government flight or a government-sponsored flight to Doha, Qatar, or you could go to a few other places, or you could go to UAE, the United Arab Emirates. After August 31st, you could get private charters there. In some cases, there were groups, some of whom are in our coalition, some of whom are not. And kind of one of the big commitments that our coalition members made is that they wouldn't move people somewhere without a viable pathway to resettlement here in the U.S., or at least a plan for resettlement somewhere. Not every group, our groups kept that commitment. Not every group kept that commitment. And what happened is UAE got, I think they took more than double what they said they would take. And they've been really good partners in all of this. They've been providing food and shelter and clothing. I think the biggest failure of all of this, across everything, has been communication and the way that we show up and communicate both here at home with our Afghans and the Afghans in our community, with our resettlement agencies who find out 24 hours ahead of time they're getting somebody in many cases, and certainly with folks in the UAE, in Doha, in Qatar, in Afghanistan. So long as your folks have a pathway to the United States, we know that the State Department has committed to working through all of those folks. I think the target is by August, which is very fast by refugee standards. However, what we found is in places like Qatar, where only government flights came to Qatar, to go to Camp al-Salim, which I had the pleasure of visiting and kind of looking through and understanding the process there. One of the things that we're really proud of having worked on as the Afghan Event Coalition and other partners in the space with the White House is, and the United States Digital Service, is a vastly improved refugee processing program, the United States Refugee Admissions Program, USRAP. Generally takes about 2 years, and in Doha, they've brought it down to somewhere between 30 and 90 days. In some cases, 124 cases, but that is a staggeringly breakneck pace, and they're testing it there. And what we have asked is that they just make that the process. But there are a lot of challenges that come with that, as any refugee could attest. So for your folks in UAE, the Afghan Event Coalition has spent a lot of time, and we've, I like to think that we've adopted the population there, even if they didn't come from our members. We really wanted to make sure that their voices were being heard and that they were being communicated with. So we had state convene a special meeting. We ensured that valid, accurate information was being given. which has been another big problem in this, right? Is folks talk and the game of telephone happens and you don't know who to trust. And you know, like a lot of times in the military, the smoke detectors, we would call it, would like become truth until somebody had to come out and disabuse folks of that. But it's so scary when there's nobody giving you the information that you need and nobody can give you a appropriate timeline or tell you these are the next steps. So when things like this pop up, we build infographics, which seems silly, but that's, I mean, nobody else is doing it, right? So we're like building these infographics to push out and share information. And what we've heard is that all of the relevant stakeholders in this, both at EHC and around the world, are leaning into the communications now. We expect to see more broad blanket communications, and we hope that your folks will be here very soon.
No, I mean, I associate myself with everything Sean just said, but I think the only thing I would expand on is that, you know, we have constituents who are stuck in Qatar, in Doha. We, even in our office, are dealing with some of the communication challenges. You know, we're noticing as an office that deals with a lot of immigration stuff, that some people are being miscategorized. You know, some of that timeline that is being used for asylum seekers, which is great because we want people to have, you know, asylum status so that they can get the resettlement dollars and be able to have an easier path. But we have people who can come in with a spousal visa because their spouses are citizens of the United States, so their process should be expedited. And so there's just a lot of barriers that are being created, I feel like, that don't need to. And it is probably due to the fact that this is a narrow, expedited process that many people, you know, have never had the fluency in engaging in. And, you know, we know that traditionally these processes, as someone who's gone through them, take about 2 years to be screened, to be processed, to go through all the medical examinations and everything that you have to. So although we are optimistic and hopeful and grateful that it's getting done, it's still a little frustrating in the pace that it's getting done and some of the unnecessary barriers that are being created that don't have to be created. I think in the front here. So I just want to check in with people. It's about 27 minutes before some of us have to break our fast, and I want to be respectful. So I think we will take 2 questions. Are you guys okay with that? If we take 2 questions together, and then end there. Some of us will stick around, come down, maybe have side conversations if that's okay. So the 2 ladies, this one and the one behind her.
First of all, thank you all so much for your incredible work and dedication to welcoming our new community members here. I'm a former Afghan refugee myself, and today a practicing physician in the Twin Cities here. Myself and a group of my colleagues, we developed the Afghan Refugee Health Response Team. Essentially, it's a volunteer health clinic that has, over the last many months, taken care of all the new families who have arrived here at the transitional site to make sure they're healthy and they're taken care of in a culturally sensitive and trauma-informed care. I had the privilege of meeting a lot of these families and caring for them, and one of the recurrent theme is the ongoing trauma and stress about family members who have been left behind, the people who have left behind, and that's on the minds of a lot of the Afghans that's here in the audience too. And this is a very difficult question, but I'm going to pose it anyways. What are we doing about the international response? I mean, I'm very grateful for the people who have escaped to safety, but 40 million left behind, 5 million children at risk of starvation as we sit here today. And seems like as the news coverage has stopped, the suffering has only increased. And I don't have access to Washington. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you, Congresswoman, for this session. If you have any, I know this is about the local response, but if you have any insight in what are we doing as a country? What is Washington doing? Are we going to just turn our back to the millions, to the entire country that believed in this mission for 20 years? Very tough question, but I would love any response, and happy to connect during this session or afterwards as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the panel, and I think it's really evident of all the work that has been and continues to be done. I am a military veteran, and I'm also a school counselor in the Twin Cities, so I have a lot of, I have a lot of investment, and I really, really care about us making this transition really, I don't know, I'm losing my words because obviously I'm literally on the spot, but I'll get to my question. Naveen, you were talking about how everyone's spread out and we don't have our Afghan refugee community all located in one area. So my question is, how are the resources being shared now that we're moving into the next phase, as you had said, Rochelle? How are we connecting the families to each other? As a school counselor with a large caseload, I know that I can't get to all 400 students, so sometimes my power is in sharing with a few and knowing that they're going to share that information. So my question would be on how we're sharing those resources, getting them connected to each other, and providing them the tools so that we're empowering them to be a participant, an active participant in their own resettlement. Thank you.
I feel like Rochelle might be a better person to answer this question because she is in control of all the resources. So Afghan Cultural Society is kind of in the wings right now. We are doing what we can to connect with any family we can, but we are not connected to every family. So hearing your story is not a story that we haven't heard, but we maybe have not connected with that family yet. And what we are doing is we are connecting with every single organization that we can to know what resources they have available. So when we do have a family that comes to us and they say, hey, these are the things that we need right now, we are able to direct them to where they need to go. Do you have anything to add about resources? We're in the process of getting a drop-in center space. Hopefully, we are looking at a place on Friday. We have a few options, and we will have a central location for people to come when they are in need of something. And we'll have case managers available, and community. Almost everybody that works for us or is part of this organization is from Afghanistan. And at Maharia is one of our board members. She's a refugee. She came 20 years ago. 20 years ago. Amina came 30-some years ago. My husband came 30 years ago as well. They're all refugees of Afghanistan from the war that started 40 years ago. So all of us have I was born here, so all of us have varying experiences of being Afghan in America. We're hoping that we can connect with people in different ways. We have different language skills, we have different ethnic backgrounds, because Afghanistan is a very diverse community. So we're doing what we can to make sure that we are welcoming to everyone that is arriving. But it is hard for us. The only way is word of mouth, ultimately. And so that's why I'm here, is because I want to make sure that people know we're here so that people can direct folks to us. Do you have anything to add, Louise?
And I would add to that there's a lot of resources in the community that exist to help with that longer term integration, right? So a lot of the focus thus far has really been on this initial resettlement, and as we're turning the corner, there are resources that exist. So my office, one of the things that we do is we fund Resettlement Network that has things like ongoing community orientation, or like not just like how do you use currency, but then how do you start thinking about financial literacy, how do you start thinking about credit, right? So these phase things. And so it will be really important to figure out how to get that information into the right hands. We work with about 25, we fund about 25 different organizations around the state that do that. And many of them are trying to hire and onboard Afghans to make sure that they have the cultural competency to serve people well. And most of them are actually community-based organizations that were founded by refugee groups that came before. So there's going to be this really interesting, I think, learning and building on that experience. So some of those things exist. So I'm going to connect with you guys, Anita, don't run out of here, okay? To make sure that you guys have the context and the information of those organizations that do exist, that are there to start to help like fill those gaps. The other thing that is great is that the federal government, as I mentioned before, has like allocated more resources for this resettlement than any other resettlement. I've been in this field for 25 years. And so the other thing that our office is really looking at right now is like, where are those gaps? And where are the places that we need to be continuing to invest so that we can make sure that we are filling those gaps as they emerge.
Thank you for sharing that. You talked about having a hub to come into. In LA right now, Los Angeles, for the next 3 weeks, DHS, USCIS is piloting these things called welcome centers, where they're concentrating all of the resources to bring people, for folks to just show up to and get kind of whatever they have handled. We've asked them to kind of give us their resources in a box so we can then distribute it out to, we've asked them to distribute it out to congressional offices, but we're going to share with our friends in Congress and say, like, hey, here you go, we want to do these. So I think there's a lot of resources that way. I want to answer your question, and your question and kind of your description of the organization that you're working with led me to think about a woman who, up until very recently, was an Afghan diplomat in Washington, D.C. And we were sitting at the Hamilton, and which is a restaurant in downtown D.C. I'll think you might, okay. And she said, she looked at me we were kind of talking, every time I come to town, which is every few weeks, we talk about kind of what's next for Afghanistan, what's next for her family. And she kind of had a moment and this woman is just so stoic and so incredible and such a good ambassador for her country. And she said, my country has lost a generation. And this happened, again, 40 years ago. We lost a generation. And I'll never forget that conversation. That's what I see in your organization here. So I really hope that you get the resources and support that you need. And I want to tell you that it's going to be really hard. It's not going to be 40 million people that get out, right? It's not going to be probably even 1 million people that get out. But I can tell you that in every conversation we have with the White House, every conversation I've had either in the West Wing or in any piece of the federal government, what we've heard and what we've demanded is a long-term, multi-year, end-to-end commitment with redundancy to keep the promise. For anybody who believed in the idea of America and then did something that has now led to them being under threat. You all stood with us time and time again. We made a promise to you and you didn't ask for a lot. So the least that we can do is stick by that commitment. And what we've heard from the President's Chief of Staff on down to every staffer at the State Department and DOD and so on and so forth, without getting into operational details, I'll tell you that the commitment is there and we expect to hear the President say that very soon.
I think the general earlier was talking about how it was sort of a blessing that DOD was running the operation, and I noticed I felt it because I had a first-hand experience being at Fort McCoy, seeing the care and compassion that a lot of the service members were engaging in as they dealt with Afghan evacuees, right? Many of them, almost all of them served there, and almost all of them felt a deep connection. And I bring that up because I think that's going to be a saving grace for a lot of people in Afghanistan as we go through this process. I know you say it's not, if the media has abandoned it, it's not, there's no wall-to-wall coverage. But I know that the servicemen and women who have deep connection with folks in Afghanistan have not. We hear from them a lot. And they are doing all that they can do. And, you know, they, I think, have a lot more influence than the general public, maybe a little bit. So that I will say for, that in many ways is going to be helpful as we try to make sure we don't neglect our promise to Afghanistan and Afghans. Because many of the countries that we've been involved in conflict that still need our support don't have that. And so that, I think, in itself is a blessing, and it makes my job a little easier. The second part, I think, is that, you know, it's heartbreaking to know that there are a lot of resources, financial resources, that are needed inside the country. Not just in the form of aid, but also in the form of unfreezing some of the resources that already belong to Afghans, which we are in some ways stopping or diverting, which in some ways feels like theft of the resources that should be going to Afghans. And it's heartbreaking to hear about the stories of people who are selling their organs just to survive, or, you know, the stories of people, you know, who are in desperate situations where they are leaving their children or trading their children for resources. And, you know, so for many of us in Congress, this issue is important. You know, we obviously are very concerned about what life for Afghans means under the rule under the Taliban. We know that life for young girls and women is never going to be the same. And we know that for a lot of people, their life is going to be altered. And many of the countries that should be supportive of the plight of Afghans, whether it's Pakistan, whether it is, you know, Qatar, you know, all of these other countries that should care about the actual people and what they are going to live now with as they will be living under the Taliban, are not stepping up in the ways that I would like. And so we continue to speak out, pressure them, but legislatively we're fighting to make sure there are resources. We're fighting to change immigration laws to try to give more people the opportunity to come to the United States. Obviously, there's some challenges with the refugee caps, so family reunification isn't the way it used to be. So there's a lot of moving pieces that we're trying to address. But know that from me, from everyone else, Afghans, whether they are out of the limelight or not, are not going to be out of our hearts. So thank you again to everyone who has spent this time with us. Thanks to our amazing panelists for their contribution, for taking the time to update the community. If you used interpreter equipment, please give it back to somebody somewhere back there before you leave. And again, just with gratitude, have a blessed night, Ramadan Mubarak, and again, it's an honor to be able to do, you know, the work that we do in regards to casework, but it's also an honor to be in Washington fighting for the issues you all care about. So thank you all.
There was a cooperation.